Okay. Sorry that the other class that I just got through did not record. I thought it was recording, but it wasn't. So I'm going to do this PowerPoint really quick just to have it recorded. So for the people who did not attend. Let me, just give me 1 second. I'm getting everything loaded. Share my screen. I'm almost done. Okay, I'm gonna cut my camera off because you don't need to see me, you just need to see the PowerPoint, and I'll talk through it as quickly as I can. How much do you really know about angels? What are angels in the Bible? By the way, next week I'll be doing a similar test, but it'll be 16 questions. This has 12. And what I have is poll questions that I put them up in the class votes on whichever answer they want. Then I share the results and then I post the answer. But you're obviously skipping all of that. So you're just going straight to the answers. Messengers. So what are angels in the Bible? Messengers. Genesis 32:3, we see the word messengers, malak. These are used as human or angelos in the Greek in the New Testament. There's a couple of examples. And here's a couple of examples used as divine. Divinity represents heavenly being. It doesn't mean that only God's divine, because that can't be true, because God has a divine counsel and it doesn't negate his divinity. So divinity is more of where the thing is more than what it actually is. Sort of like angel. Angel is not a description of a spiritual being. It is a description of a messenger in the Old Testament. The New Testament has a different view of what an angel is to a degree. It sort of morphed into more of a spiritual thing, but it, and it did the same thing with demons, and also the word Satan. It did the same thing there as well. In the Old Testament, like the serpent in the serpent in the Old Testament is never called Satan. Actually, there isn't the name Satan for a spiritual fallen one is not actually ever given to a spiritual fallen one. Anytime in the Old Testament you see the name Satan, some translations will capitalize it like a name Satan, but it's not actually that. That's actually a theological input. The actual Hebrew says the Satan. So it was only during Second Temple period that that name Satan got put on an entity as a personal name. Before that, it was just simply means adversary. So, and the same thing happened with some other terminology. So sometimes you'll see things in the New Testament. What it'll do is it will, what you'll see is if you look in the New Testament on how things are used and you go to the Old Testament, you're like, it looks a little different. That's usually because during the Second Temple period, the meaning changed some. In the Second Temple period, writings influenced the New Testament, early first century Christians, and also the first century Jews. It influenced them greatly in so many different ways. Who is called Elohim in the Bible? So Elohim, according to Mormons, they say Elohim is God. This is his name. Well, his name's not Elohim. His name is Yahweh. Elohim is just a description of Yahweh, the gods of other nations, the members of Yahweh's heavenly council, and the prophet Samuel. So you can see right here, 1 Samuel 28:13, that is where where that witch by the request of King Saul, conjured up Saul's spirit and from Sheol. And Saul said, "What do you see?" And she said, "I see an Elohim." So Elohim is not a description of a person, attributes. It is a description of where the thing resides in the spiritual realm. Here's some examples. We will not possess what Chemas, your God, Elohim, gives. And then it says, Lord, our God, Elohim. So you can see here, Elohim has, it's irrespective on whether it's the God of Israel or just some other God. It's this title. Here's another couple of examples. So it's not just the now here you can see that God, Elohim, has taken his place in his divine counsel. And notice, remember I said divine. God says this is in he calls his counsel divine. In the midst of the gods, Elohim, he holds judgment. So Elohim, don't get tied up on, are there more than one God? You have to give me a definition of what you're trying to ask me. Is there more than one Elohim? Of course, Scripture plainly you can see this yourself. Scripture says that. But is there more than one God like Yahweh? No, Yahweh's species unique. There's nothing like Yahweh. Yahweh created all Elohims and everything else that exists. And Yahweh is uncreated. Yahweh is an Elohim, but there's no Elohim like Yahweh. Let's just be clear about that. So how many wings do angels have? The answer is 0. Anytime an angel appears, a messenger appears, it's always as a man, never as a woman. And someone asked in class, is there a time where a female angel appearing as a human female and a male angel appearing as a human male, could they procreate? And I said, well, there's no examples of a woman, a spiritual being ever even taking the shape of a female. So I don't think that's even possible. My wife says, just like in the spiritual world, or just like in the natural world, in the spiritual world, female spirits would be smarter and wouldn't be so stupid as to procreate with humans or other male angels or whatever. But anyway, sorry about that sidetrack. I just thought that was interesting. But anytime an angel appears, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Anytime an angel appears, it always appears as, as a man. And they can, we'll talk about that again a little later in this class today. What is the divine counsel? The choices were wisdom of God, God's angels, blah, blah, blah. But the actual answer is a court of high-level spiritual beings. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. Let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. Have you listened in the counsel of God? And do you limit wisdom to yourself? So here's some different terminologies for the same thing. The sons of God are known as divine council, assembly of holy ones, and council of God. And they're also Mount Assembly. And the council of the Lord. So this council has some different names in different verses, but basically it's all the same. So these are divine council, or lesser heavenly beings, lesser than what? Lesser than Yahweh. Here's a couple of more examples. What does Yahweh's heavenly council do? So here was the choices. And a lot of people chose only observe him making decisions. And some chose only worship him. The actual answer is cooperate in his decision making. In this story, what we will see is one spirit said, they said, God said, he's done. I'm going to wipe out Ahab. And one spirit said one thing, another spirit said another. Then the spirit said, hey, I'll tell you what, I'll be a lying spirit and his prophet. We'll take him out that way. And God said, all right, do it that way. So God's in control, but he allows his divine counsel to have their input. And like I said in class, since God knows all things, if God said each and every time, as soon as you started to speak, he says, I know. And then before you even got the breath out, even to make a sound, I know. And then you started to say something else, he says, I know. That wouldn't be a very good conversation. Sometimes we need to hear ourselves speak in order for us to learn from our mistakes of just us, or just us talking. And conversations are important, even though God doesn't need it because he already knows all. We need conversations. We need to interact in order for our personal growth. That's what I think. Here's another story of where God and spiritual beings are making, where they're actually participating in decision making. Here's another one where it talks about the Watchers. The Watchers, of course, I don't know if it's still in the first book of Enoch. I think it's in the first 36 chapters. It's known as the book of Watchers. So if you want to know more about that, I would say look at that. Look at Enoch, and you'll see what influenced Jude and Peter, because they quoted from it. And that was the worldview they had. I'm not saying it's scripture, but I am saying that it influenced the Bible. Excluding Israel, what being or beings ruled over the nations of the world in the Old Testament? Yahweh alone, the kings of Israel, or Satan? All these were wrong. The members of the Yahweh's council was the correct answer, and here's why. And here's some supporting scripture. Allotted nations to the sons of God or divine princes. So some people will argue, well, you'll see. Well, first let's talk about Deuteronomy 32:8. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided, excuse me one second. Okay. When he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of sons of God. Now, some translations say sons of Israel. That's in the MT, the Masoretic text. Now, that dates around 900 or so AD. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew, which date the Gospel by 2 or 3 centuries, BC. Both of them say God, and this little part is reflecting back to Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. So, if that's the case, if it is reflecting and referring back to that, Israel didn't even exist yet. So it makes no sense for Israel to say it. So the oldest manuscripts we have say God. The newer manuscripts we have say Israel. I'm not sure why the change was made, but I do know, and I do believe it was inaccurate. Now, some people here in Daniel 10:13 will say the prince, they'll argue that this, like the prince of the kingdom of Persia, is actually a person. But they have no problems saying here in the same verse, Michael, one of the chief princes. Everyone says that's Michael the archangel. He can be a prince, but this prince can't be a spiritual being. Well, in reality, it directly relates to Deuteronomy 32. The sons of God will put the borders were fixed according to the number of the sons of God. One of those sons of God was called the prince of Persia. And then you have also a prince of Greece. And there was more of them. So God divided up at Genesis 11, 70 nations. It's called the Table of Nations. God divided those up. And he also appointed spiritual beings over those 70 nations, just like he did heavenly. So just like now, there are spiritual beings, divine council, that interact and make decisions on God's behalf, and he's allowing us to take part, make decisions here on earth. So, but just because he allowed us to take place on earth and do things on earth doesn't take away from his sovereignty. But some people believe if you think that the divine council in the spiritual realm makes any spiritual decisions, then that takes away God's divinity somehow, or his sovereignty. It doesn't. I don't even, I don't know why they think that. Sorry, get a drink of water. So what are cherubs? Are they fat little babies? That's one of the questions. Well, obviously the answer is throne guardians, not angels, not winged serpentine beings. Now, before I go anywhere else, let's talk about this winged serpentine being, a seraphim. A seraphim. Next week we'll talk more about where these terms cherub, where cherub and seraph comes from. The Akkadian and Egyptian influences. We'll talk about that, but for all practical purposes, both a winged serpentine being, a seraph, is a cherub, but not all cherubs are seraphim. They're not the same thing. It's like cherub is the large group, and part of that large group is one type of cherub. One type of cherub is a seraph. So anyway, that's why that answer is incorrect. But here's where cherub, along with seraphim, are guardians of Yahweh's throne. We do know this, and that's why I was just taking the time to explain the difference between a cherub and a seraph. So it's just by the way, cherubs are never called angels, because they're malak. Malak is, remember from that earlier question, malak means angel in Hebrew. In the Old Testament, if a spiritual being was not giving a message from God, it was not acting in the job description of a messenger, a malak. Can angels procreate? No. Humans that die become angels? No. They are genderless? No. They are immaterial? They can, and they did. Well, the genderless part, let's talk about that. Jesus said in heaven, you will neither be male or female, never, there won't be any husband or wife, it's not like that. Well, we're not talking about angels in heaven. What we're talking about is angels who come into this realm, into this reality. When they come into this reality, every time they come into this reality, they look like men. Here we see there 3 men were standing. By the way, everyone agrees that these are angels. 3 men were standing. They had their feet washed. They were able to eat curd's milk and calf. We don't know if they could digest, but at least they had a stomach. They had a mouth. They looked like men, but they were more than that. Here, it talks about in Hebrew that we could actually entertain angels and not even know it. What does that mean? An angel is so human-like. I say that they actually turn into basic, fully functioning humans that we couldn't even know that. We wouldn't even know. We could probably test them and still wouldn't know if they didn't want us to. And it says Peter was standing at the gate. No, it's his angel. Here, they couldn't tell the difference between. They wouldn't, in their thoughts, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference between an angel and Peter. They couldn't. They're like, because they were just that human-like. So yeah, I do believe if they were that human-like, if they could eat, they could. It doesn't say they sleep, but they could wrestle and they could do all kinds of things. And I believe they could procreate, just as it says in Genesis 6. Who is Michael? So Michael, I hate to give it away, but I don't have a choice in this context. The Prince of Israel. He is not the Prince of the Lord's army. That was the number that no one, the Prince of all other angels. Some people chose that too. Pre-incarnated Jesus. We're not cultic, so we didn't. No one picked that. Here's where it says, "But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your prince." So Michael was a great prince. He was a heavenly prince, but he's not in charge of Yahweh's army. This is God talking, the Lord, the angel of the Lord. For he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord." This is not Michael. Some people think he is, but he is not. He is the prince of the host. Who is the prince of the host? The second member of the Trinity, the angel of the Lord. It's important to remember that up until the 2nd century AD, there was a Jewish belief called two powers in heaven. They had to reconcile this. You have a God here on earth and a God in heaven, but there's only one God. So these are like two different things, but yet they're still the same God. So they were basic Binitarians instead of Trinitarians. So when people were saying in the 1st century, Jesus is that second power in heaven, he is that, then they made it a heresy. Just like they quit reading Psalms 53. I mean, not Psalms, Isaiah 53. They don't read that in their churches or the synagogues anymore. Why? Because they're trying to do anything they can to lessen the divinity of Christ. So if you pull up online and just look at the reading schedule of the Jewish church, it's posted. It'll go from Isaiah. Isaiah, it'll go to the end of Isaiah 52 and then go to 54. It skips 53. Because if you take that verse and read it to a Jew, and if they ever heard anything about Jesus Christ, they'll think, if they don't know that you're reading from the Old Testament, they'll say, yeah, that's the story of Jesus. And that's how strong that reflects the life of Jesus. So they quit reading it. It's called the Forbidden Psalm or something like that. I mean, the forbidden chapter or hidden chapter. I can't remember what they call it. Which angels are named in the Bible? So most people picked Michael, Raphael, and Gabriel. Here in Daniel, you see Michael's name. Here in Daniel, you also see Gabriel's name. Here in Luke and Jude, you see Gabriel and Michael, but you never hear Raphael's not in there. Raphael is actually in Second Temple writings, like the book of Tobit, which we will look at next week, because we will look at Tobias, but not because of this, not because of Raphael, but it's more like how Raphael deals with Tobias and the demon, because next week's subject's on demonic stuff. Well, actually, I'm going to have to cover that in 2 weeks. With whom did Jacob wrestle? Well, the answer is all the above. He wrestled with God and man and angel. Here's the supporting scriptures. You see here in Genesis 32, he wrestled, and a man wrestled with him. 32:30, he was seeing God face to face. Hosea 12:4, he wrestled with an angel, but he met God. So it says that all three. The picture obviously has a man with wings, but we've already established that this man would have no wings. But if you looked at it, you'd say, oh, this guy's wrestling an angel, because our thought is angels, what we're taught so often is angels have wings, which of course they do not. No messenger from God has wings, not in the Bible anyway. Will God reconcile fallen angels? Now, this one got a lot of people, because what they said was, no, they are lost forever. And the answer is he already has. Now, here, God reconciled everything. For in him, all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him he reconciled to himself all things, whether on earth and in heaven. He didn't say all good things or all bad things or all fallen things. He said all things. So everything is reconciled to him. But here's what's important. Being reconciled does not mean redeemed. It's not the same thing. And to which of the angels has he ever said, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet? Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation? And he was also there disarmed and defeated. He disarmed the rulers and authorities, which it refers to spiritual realm, and put them to shame by triumphing over them in him. If you knew all 12 of these, then you were a biblical genius. If not, you might want to refer to Michael Heiser's book, The Angels, what the Bible really says about God's heavenly host. A lot of people were surprised because the Bible, because there's a lot of church tradition that slip into the church that are not actually biblical. They're just simply been around a while and they become popular. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Turn my video back on. I hope me running through that little quiz was beneficial. Learning, I hope that you were able to learn. And I'm sorry that this was a brief version. This wasn't in the class setting, but it was the best I could do after I noticed that it didn't record. Well, God bless you. Have a wonderful day.